Now, please welcome to the stage Dario Amodei, CEO Anthropic, for a conversation with Eric Newcomer, the state of machine intelligence.
Dario, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we've been talking all day. I hate to hit the same theme over and over again, but you actually know the answer. Are LLMs going to get smarter? Have we hit a wall? Like, are we all going crazy for no reason? What's the trajectory?
So I've been following this field for 10 years, and was among the first to kind of document the scaling laws and the scaling of AI. Nothing I've seen in the field is out of character with what I've seen over the last 10 years, or leads me to expect that things will slow down. First, I think the class of reasoning models that we've seen, the use of test time compute, is going to continue the scaling. And I think even within the current scaling laws, I think something that people don't as much appreciate who haven't been in the field or following it is, every time we train a new model, there's always challenges, right? Like, the scaling laws don't say every time you train a larger model, it does better. It says every time you train a larger model, if you have high quality data, if you're able to get the engineering right, if you're able to...
Well, you have to come up with new ideas still every time.
Do all the optimization, often small new ideas, right? Often like, I got to get this numerical optimization thing right, or, I need the floating point precision needs to be done in the right way. I do think there's perhaps an effect that as we're spending more and more money, the engineering complexity of getting it right is increasing, and that's why companies need to be larger, need to have more talent. But I don't see any evidence that the scientific, I don't see any refutation of the scientific hypothesis.
To the extent there is a barrier, is it about data? Is it about money? Or is it just about sort of the approach to processing the data?
Again, I mostly don't think there's any barrier at all.
Okay. So are you going to deliver a new model soon?
Don't talk exactly about model release dates, but we will as a general matter, we will, I hope, continue to have better models every some number of months.
Well, X number of months. When you think to sort of future models and what you'd like to see over, not necessarily the next model, but like, what are things you'd like your models to be able to achieve that they can't today?
Yeah, I would like to see the models get better at professional tasks. So, one thing I've said is that, the models of last year, of 2023, were maybe a high school level of capability. Models we see today they have this vibe of being at kind of the intern level or the strong undergraduate level. If we go to, next year, I'm hoping that we'll see models that have a kind of almost grad school or professional level. We're starting to get to that level with coding, right? Where models are great coding assistants, but I think they're going to do even better. We look at what's happened this year so far. We've gone from about 3% on SWE-bench, which is kind of a real-world snapshot of software engineering activities, right? It's like things that simulate GitHub pull requests. We've gone from maybe 3% to 50%, and I think in the next year we're gonna get that much higher. Still.
Do you want, like, the Anthropic text box to solve the coding problem and to replace sort of Cursor or whatever, Copilot, or do you plan to build standalone products? Or when you think about this coding thing specifically, what's your approach?
Yeah, I think I think the distinction between those is not as sharp as you might think, right? Which is larger and larger parts of the task, more and more autonomy get handed over to the AI system. But there's always, at least in the short and the medium run, a role for the human, which is, there's in economics, there's this concept of comparative advantage, right? And even if the AI system is doing 90% of what the human does, the human just invests more and more in that 10% and in new things that complement the 90%. Maybe someday totally end-to-end AI systems will do everything that everyone in this room, including me and you, do. But I think that's further out. So I actually think the amount of autonomy will increase, but there will always be interaction with humans. It will always be humans who are driving the creative process.
You're sort of known as a sort of doom and gloom guy, but you wrote this Machines of Loving Grace to sort of signal some optimism. I mean, are you still the doom and gloom guy that we know and love, or what's your attitude towards being afraid of AI right now?
I think one of my points here is that optimism versus pessimism is perhaps not the right axis, right? I think extreme change versus lack of extreme change is perhaps a relevant axis. And for a long time, I've been someone who predicts that this field is going to have a lot of disruption and a lot of extreme change. I continue to make that prediction. Maybe I'll be right, maybe I'll be wrong. But if you do believe that there's going to be a lot of disruption, then you can think of some amazing good things that can happen. But then there's
you want to hit a couple? Everybody should go read the essay. But what do you think the good things that could happen?
Yeah, so I was previously a biologist and a neuroscientist. Before this was 10 years ago, before I went into AI, and one of the reasons I found that field difficult, found that people were getting stuck and that progress was slow, was just the complexity of the field. If we think about all the regulation processes of the cell, all the proteins that are made from DNA and how they interact. I mean, the most complicated code base you've ever worked with is nothing compared to the complexity of the cell. But it's not fundamentally intellectually beyond us. There's just a lot of facts and a lot of interaction between those facts, and it seems like exactly the kind of problem AI can solve. So I'm optimistic that diseases that have been with us for thousands of years, things like cancer, things like Alzheimer's disease, perhaps the very aging process itself, that limits our lifespans, that these things may be amenable, may yield to AI systems that are actually able to comprehend the complexity and figure out how to intervene on it.
Is that data ready for a machine to process? I think one thing I've been struck by your writing is just the sense that okay, we might get this super intelligence, but then humans are going to limit it in its ability to sort of get the data it needs, even though if it had the data, it could do great things.
Yeah, so I think as a technical matter, I'm not imagining AI as the scientists go out and run all these experiments and collect all this data and the AI analyzes it. I agree that's actually quite limited and may not be the limiting step. I actually think we're going to have a picture that's more like, AIs are like professors, PIs, principal investigators, and co-PIs that design experiments, say, hey, we can understand what's going on better with this disease if we invented this new kind of microscope, or we invented this new kind of molecular biotechnology for, editing genes, or tagging what part of a cell a protein is built in. And I think if you add up a bunch of these interventions, you'll make what's going on in biology transparent, and that is going to be the first step towards really understanding what is going on biologically, and that is the first step towards, designing drugs, pharmaceuticals that step in. And I think AI is going to be able to do every step of that. The only part that I think is going to be hard is our human institutions. These AIs, I think, are going to be so good that our poor human institutions are not going to be able to keep up with them. In some cases, they shouldn't. Some of those institutions are there to prevent change from happening too quickly, from things being too disruptive, to prevent society from being disrupted or collapsing. But some of those barriers are unnecessary. So that's something we're going to have to work out in response to very
right. I mean, I read your essays partially sort of putting regulatory barriers to AI could be bad because there are important things we need to achieve, and any arbitrary barrier could be a real problem. I mean, Anthropic sort of debated whether to support the California legislation. Were you ultimately in favor, and what's sort of your push in legislation right now?
Yeah, so, I think one thing I might push back against is this kind of unidirectional axis, right, of more regulation versus less regulation. I think the way we prefer to think about it is that regulation should be very surgical, precisely because of what you said, precisely because I see all of the benefits, right? The ability to save people's lives. I'm not interested in the parents or grandparents of anyone in this room dying, because we couldn't deploy AI fast enough, right? Because we overregulated it. I feel that every day. I'm very sympathetic to that. At the same time, precisely because of all the things we can do with biology, with cyber, with the autonomy of the systems, I think if you have an appreciation of what these models can do, you also have an appreciation of how they can be misused by various actors. And so I think that what we need is some very targeted regulation testing that's focused only on the worst threats. and whose goal is
nuclear, or what are your big ones?
Yeah, bio, cyber, nuclear, autonomy risks, right? These things that are really, threats to society and humanity, right? Things where it's like, man, this is really an issue of like public safety and national security.
Are we
right?
close to this AI that we need to keep in a box, or the risk of you understand it much better than me, but this AI that's going to run free scenario, how close does that feel?
I think right now the models are not smart enough, but they're very quickly becoming smarter. The models are also not autonomous enough. So I think one reason people don't take these concerns seriously is that you're like, hey, it's just a chatbot. You talk to the chatbot, it's absurd that the chatbot.
Yeah, Andreessen's like, it's math. It's just math.
It's just, well, I don't know. I mean, isn't your brain just math? Like the same calculation, when a neuron fires, it sums up the synapses. That's math too.
I agree.
So, we shouldn't be afraid of Hitler. It's just math.
Right. Oh no, I think it's a well-taken point. I mean, it is like eventually, like an intelligent system gets more intelligent. Where do you draw the line?
No, it's the whole universe is math. But no, I mean, I think joking aside, again, I think we need to balance these things.
But the box sort of question,
yeah.
I mean, it's sort of the idea that it needs to be isolated from the internet, and you're worried about it.
I think once we have these agents that are acting, people will have an intuition for, one, these are really powerful, and these are going to make our lives a lot better. But man, you better know how to steer these pretty well. And all this stuff about, people laugh today when the chatbots, like, they say something a little unpredictable. Like, we're going to have to do a better job of controlling the agents than that, because, it's not as funny when they RM-RF your hard drive.
Do you? What's your PDoom these days?
I don't really like.
You've learned your lesson on this one.
I never liked those words. I think they're kind of weird. I just like my view is just that, like, look, we should measure for risks as they come up. And in the meantime, we should get all the economic benefits that we could get, and we should find ways to measure the risks that are effective but are minimally disruptive to the amazing economic process that we see going on now. That the last thing we want to do is slow it down.
What's the Trump administration mean for the trajectory of AI? I mean, you've got security now. You see yourself, I think understandably, large language models are going to become the thing of nation-state interest. Like, what's your interaction with the U.S. government, and does that change in a Trump world?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's several dimensions to it. I mean, we've always worked with the government on various kinds of policy. I mean, I've advocated for this type of targeted regulation. I think we advocated that to the last administration. That's our position for this administration. We're going to be completely consistent on the matter. Obviously, different administrations have different positions, maybe more or less receptive, but that's not something we can control. We're just going to advocate for what we believe in. In terms of things like security around the models, yeah, this is a worry that I have. I mean, I think we shouldn't be naive. The economic power of these models is going to turn into, it's going to turn into governmental and state power. I think I do think it's important. The use of these models by autocracies could be really terrible.
Are we picking our favorite philosopher king? Is it sort of like we have to shop which AI CEO, look into their soul, and see which one we trust the most?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bad. I think I said this on a podcast. I think it's a bad idea to think in terms of individuals, like companies or institutions. We've tried to build Anthropic in such a way. We have these structures like long-term benefit trust. We've imposed responsible scaling plan on ourselves. That would be the point of targeted regulation that, I think a reasonable society, particularly when there are technologies that grow and change this fast, it needs to put limits on the power of individuals. And that applies to people in government. It applies to people who run companies, right? Everyone has...
So you want a CEO who can get kicked out by the board and get back in and really overwhelm. That's how companies should be run?
I think you're baiting me, and I'm not going to take the bait.
A company you defected from? To put it in a more sort of a different way, like the race to the top idea.
Yeah.
Part of what the sort of, I think a core goal of Anthropic is, if we can be good, we'll attract the best engineers, and that will put pressure on other people. And I mean, it seems like a lot of people are joining Anthropic right now. Or give us the state of play on your race to the top idea here?
Yeah, I mean, I've really seen this play out, right? So there are a bunch of practices we engage in, our invention of mechanistic interpretability, our work on things like constitutional AI, to much more mundane and kind of commercially focused things like, we try to do better on security, we try and produce models that enterprises can trust. All of these things through various channels, other companies tend to adopt after we've done them. So there are now nearly 1,000 people at Anthropic, and so I've been through a lot of kind of recruiting fights between us and other companies, and so I see it as a repeated game. There'll be an engineer or researcher who comes to Anthropic. I'm really inspired by your interpretability work. I'm really inspired by the stuff you've done on constitutional AI. You've been really thoughtful about the RSP, and I always say, go to the competitor you didn't choose. Write up a document, give a list of reasons you chose Anthropic. And then I repeat that. And after that's happened 5 times, the other company gets really sick of it. And then before they know it, they have a team that's doing the same thing.
Is Elon responsive to this? Is XAI, do you see them? I mean, that does not feel like a company that's going to engage in your race to the top. Do you see them as a real competitor at the moment?
It is pretty interesting. I don't want to comment specifically on other companies, but Elon has this kind of view that defies classification, right? Where on one hand, I think the models are very if you just look at them in kind of a normal way, just kind of mundane safety things, it's kind of a Wild West. But he's also been in some contexts supportive of regulation. So he's one that I think is very hard to classify.
I mean, you probably know better than me, but it feels a little bit like if he's in charge, he trusts it. When other people are in charge, he is somewhat apprehensive.
You're baiting me again.
Well, we want to know. These are real existential things. We have to have an open and honest conversation about what's happening. And I think a premise of a lot of my writing is that the actual characters, individual people, really matter in some of these decisions.
I think they do really matter, but I think we should do everything we can to make them matter less.
Institutions.
That is my perspective here. When individuals matter, we failed in some way.
One just sort of specific question I had, because I've actually been debating with my wife about this. Do you think your models and other models are going to be filmmakers and creatives, or where are you on sort of the models as creative spirit?
Yeah, again, I mean, I think the models will have quite a lot of creative ability. I would go back to this view of, at least in the short and medium term, right? There's some world where all the AIs are smarter than all, incomparably smarter than all the humans, and we can debate when that happens. The logic of comparative advantage is extremely powerful. Even when the models can do 90, even when they can do 99% of what humans can do, humans will continue to have a surprisingly large creative role. So I do think that even as the models start to be creative, I use Claude to help with my own writing. It still very much feels like it's authored by humans. One thing that maybe has been a little bit less like this is the image generation, the video generation models, where what they do, it's kind of like lumpy. You generate an image or you don't. We're starting to do editing on it, but this is maybe one reason, not the only reason, but one reason Anthropic has been less involved in models like that. They do feel like they're more of a direct replacement. I think they have a wider range of safety issues associated with them. Something about the visual.
Like diffusion models overall?
Yeah, like text to image models or text to video models.
You're going to stay away, or?
We haven't done them for now. We have no current plans to do them. I never want to say never. Lots of things could change in the ecosystem, both about whether it makes sense from a business perspective to do them, or the safety properties of doing them. But this is not something we've done so far, and it's not something we're currently working on.
Anthropic, the business. I mean, how do you take stock? It seems like you're doing very well selling to businesses, working with businesses, and just people here get the consumer product, but maybe America at large doesn't. Yeah, is that a fair assessment?
I think we've been deliberately much more focused on the enterprise side than the consumer side. Every other company in this space either is a large consumer-focused company or is a startup that, for a number of reasons, seems characterologically more suited for consumer, even if they do both consumer and enterprise. So we've been majority enterprise for most of Anthropic's history, and so most of our attention, most of our development attention goes there. And it really shows in what we've been able to put into our API. For example, we identified coding as an area that lots of businesses want to build on. So, for example, Cursor, which people mentioned. There's Cognition. We're recently in GitHub Copilot. There's coding.
Their software is powered by Anthropic, is what you're saying.
Yes.
You're the brains. They're figuring out the software.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is kind of API business, right? Where you make a model available, and people are going to build a product on top of that model. And we don't have time to worry about the details of every product. We can't make a product for coding and a different kind of product for coding and a product for legal and a product for something else. And so I think that's actually the magic of serving enterprises, is that you let the ecosystem do the exploration for you.
How much does the success of Anthropic depend on being the smartest? Like, you need to be the leader and you need to maintain a persistent edge. And if so, man, that sounds like a stressful business to run.
I think to be blunt, there's really two ways to succeed. If you have a much better model than everyone else, then you'll succeed everywhere. If there are a few players with strong models, which is the position we're in now, I mean, I think Anthropic models for many purposes, especially code, I think are the strongest. But we have maybe three or four players with fairly strong models. If you have a kind of product direction or a niche or a business model that's different from that of the other three players, which isn't very hard because there aren't that many players, and the models are roughly comparable, a little better or a little worse, that's a sustainable business model. And I think for Anthropic, that's been deployment on clouds like AWS and GCP, and it's been enterprise as compared to consumer. Although, despite consumer not being our central focus, we put some effort into it, and it's actually, again, it's grown quite fast for something that is not the central.
I know, it's easy to underestimate how young your company still is and how much has happened in such a short period of time.
I think of the five companies, we're the only one who hasn't been around for 10 years or is tied to some large existing source of company wealth or individual wealth.
From what you see, you're building this API business. I don't know, what company should people start that like Anthropic is too busy to do, or that you think you are making possible?
Code is definitely code is definitely going crazy these days, and I think that's going to continue. The progress is going to continue. I think that in many ways has a wind at its back, because code has this property during training or during deployment that it's really easy to verify in an automated way, right? The human doesn't need to be in the loop of seeing how good it is. My favorite, in line with Machines of Loving Grace, I would love to see more in the health and biology side. That's maybe less of a business judgment and more of a judgment of the humanitarian value. Although I think there's a lot to be done there, and I think it'll as a side effect also be quite profitable. I think there's a lot to be done in the legal and financial space. I think those areas are pretty ripe for...
Where you just are a better trader than everybody else, or trading services?
Yeah, providing financial services in kind of a better and more informed way. I think on the legal side, like, huge amount of legal work is just super repetitive. We're powering a service with Intuit now, which you can ask better questions when you're filing your taxes. So I think things like accounting, consulting, we're partnering with.
Related to coding, sorry to interrupt. Synthetic data, are you bullish on that, or you think that's...
I'm quite bullish on synthetic data. Yeah, I mean, the example I always give of synthetic data is AlphaGo Zero got better than the best human player at Go without ever training on human data or playing a human player. It only played itself. So it may seem like you can't get something from nothing, but AlphaGo Zero kind of got something from nothing.
How much, how important is it that Anthropic always stay a standalone business? I mean, obviously you have these relationships with Amazon and Google, and, I guess in a Democratic administration with Lena Khan, it would have been like, well, you could never sell anyway, whatever. Now there seems like more of a chance that someday you could sell. Is that off the table for security concerns, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think our picture is that we believe that our mission is best served by being an independent company, right? These things we have, like long-term benefit trust, responsible scaling policy, like those are things that are very important to us, and by far my strong preference is to do these as an independent company. And if we look at our position in the market and what we've been able to do, the independent partnerships we have with Google, with Amazon, with others, I think this is a very viable thing to do.
Can you use their chips, or do you basically need to use NVIDIA most of the time?
We use NVIDIA, but we also use custom chips from both Google and Amazon.
And how are they stacking up right now? Or what's your
look, different chips have different trade-offs. I think we're getting value from all of them.
The last thing, just you like serious intelligence? I get it wrong every time. Not AGI. What?
It was just a throwaway phrase. I called it powerful.
Powerful, whatever.
I just wanted to give it some. I wanted to give it some term so generic to indicate that
well, it's already hard to define.
There's no buzzword here. There's just models that get better and better.
Define it for yourself, and then give your latest prediction on how far away we are.
Yeah, I would say again, a model that's as good as a Nobel Prize winner, polymathic across many fields, has agency, can act on its own for hours or days, and where there's a large collection of them in a data center, right? Like hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of them. I think once we get to that point,
what year?
Society's going to change. Again, I've always had very large error bars around them, but I think. It could happen in 2025, could happen in 2026, could happen in 2027. It could.
That's going to change our lives are going to be totally different when this happens. Or
yeah. There will be issues around the human barriers, deploying it, and it's not, I think, going to change our lives instantly, right?
Will you commit to 1 year? Which year is your bet right now?
Yeah, faster than others.
Which year are you picking in this? Just come on.
No.
All right, Dario, thank you so much. You've been a great sport. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.